dear students, welcome to my classroom of early medieval Indian history. Today, I am going to teach you the relationships between the peasants and the landlords during that time. Early medieval period in Indian history is a fascinating chapter which helps us to understand the transition between the ancient to the medieval period. And this transition is something which is helping us to have a better understanding of how we have noticed a kind of cultural assimilation during that time as the Musalmans, they intruded and they established their rule. When I'm talking about culture, culture is something which is the part of the civilization, and it is also synonym of progress. Culture means it can be the religious culture, it can be the social culture, and it can be the economic culture as well. Here my thrust is on the economic culture of early medieval period that creates something new or unique in the Indian history for the first time. Before understanding the dynamics of economy, it's important for us to know the social condition of that time. It was a period which was full of political unrests and tensions in the society. We have seen the proliferation of castes. The Vaishyas, they were losing their omnipotence and they had to take up the job of the Sudras. On the other hand, we have seen that how the untouchables, they were getting a position in the social hierarchy by getting recognition as the Sudras. So it was a time where we have seen religion is playing a very crucial role, and the Brahmanization or an attempt to make the society Sanskritized or Brahmanized started taking a shape to a great extent. Early medieval period is also known as the age of Kali. Kali means the period where we can witness the highest number of sins. And the foreigners who started to come to our country, here I'm talking about the Musalmans, they were referred as the Yavanas or the Mlechas. The time was definitely very crucial, and that crucial time also had an impact on economy. It was a time when we have witnessed, particularly from circa 750 AD to 1200, the time of unrests and which were evident everywhere. And what I must say that it created some kind of economic force that led to the formation of feudalism in our country, in Indian sense. On the other hand, I must say, when I talk on feudalization or feudalism, that created a space for fragmentation of land, and the peasants, they started getting exploited more and more. So, the kings, they were there, though it was a time we did not find any king who was trying to rule all over India. But definitely there were the various seats of power and those rulers, they were ruling scatteredly. And they had their feudal lords as they distributed the lands to them. And these feudal lords, along with the kings, all of them were extracting and exploiting the peasants. What they were trying to extracting? They were trying to extracting the fruits of labor from the peasants. On the other hand, unfortunately, the peasants, they had no role with regard to the surplus. So, we need to understand this genesis of feudalization or feudalism in India. The early medieval period here played the role of a catalyst, and in this entire process, land grant or the system of land grant, which was unique in Indian history, it played a very important role, or it was the tool behind this entire process where I have just mentioned feudalism was a catalyst. I would like to start with the land grant system in early medieval period and why is it important for us to understand the relationships between the landlords and the peasants. I must say, land grant system was not something unique in the Indian history. Definitely during the ancient period, there were some customs through which the kings used to donate lands to the people, but it was not officially recognized, and it was not something through which the people who were getting the lands, they would get certain benefits or they were in a position to earn revenue. But the entire thing took a more professional form during the early medieval period. The Brahmanas individually, they used to acquire lands. Similarly, I must say the secular people during this particular time, they also received land grants. I am repeating, so what I have said that Brahmin religious institutions and the non-Brahmin religious institutions of early medieval period, you can take the examples of the Buddhist and the Jain religious institutions of that time, they used to receive lands from the kings. Along with that, the secular people who were not a part of any kind of religious institution or activity, they also used to receive land grants. And those who are getting lands, they are becoming very much authoritarian and they are started performing like the feudal lords. And they were profiting from these lands. They were selling the production or the harvest from these lands, and also they were keeping in mind that they have to save some surplus. But unfortunately, the peasants, they had no share in this surplus system. During this particular period, we have seen a number of peasants. The rich peasants, the poor peasants, the sharecroppers, and many more. So it was a time we need to understand there was a stratification or a classification which existed in the status of the peasants as they were having various positions in the society, and their relationships with the landlords also decided according to their social position. So we need to understand these critical avenues. When we talk on land grant system, to understand the severity of that land grant system, we need to understand what was the nature of exploitation. If we don't understand the nature of exploitation, it's not possible for us to have a better idea on the economic history of that time. Exploitation is something which is a part of history. Exploitation makes history more meaningful. Exploitation makes civilization more progressive because exploitation gives birth to revolution. We have seen there were a number of peasant revolts took place during the time of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. It was a story of the medieval period. But if we would like to find out the roots or the genesis of this particular problem, then we need to consider early medieval period as our case study. We have seen during the early medieval period, the kings, they imposed a lot of taxes on the peasants, and the feudal lords or those people who got the lands by the virtue of land grant system during the early medieval period, they performed the role of the tax collectors. We have seen a number of taxes, both legal and illegal, were collected from the peasants. What were those taxes? I must give you the references. Those taxes were Bhoga, Bhaga, Kara, Uparikara, Hiranya, Udaranga, Halikara, Samasta Pratyaya. These were the taxes which were collected from the peasants, and the means of collecting taxes were oppressive. From the inscriptions of early medieval period, we get the references of these taxes. In South India also, we have seen how the Chola rulers and others, they used to collect taxes where the feudal lords, they played an instrumental role. The Vakataka grants list 14 types of taxes. The Pallava records specify 18 to 22 of them. The number of taxes enormously increased until the end of circa 1000 CE. From the 7th century onwards, grants provided rights to water resources, trees, bushes, and pastures to the Doni, which not only badly affected the peasantry of the donated villages, but also strengthened the power of the Donis. So it was a time when we are noticing how the peasants, they got evicted from their lands, how they lost their rights over the environment, which was very much important for their livelihood. They started losing their rights over the forests, over the water bodies, and their resources started getting very much limited. I'm talking about the natural resources, which helped them not only to live their lives, also helped them to sell some of this to have a better economic standard or position in the society. Unfortunately, they lost everything. So it was not only an exploitation which was very much, what I can say, noticeable in the case of the peasants, it was also something which can be termed as the beginning of the destruction of environment. Because the people who were the feudal lords, they never thought to protect the environment. Rather, they destructed or destroyed the natural resources, and they gave utmost importance for the maximum harvest for their own profit. So the situation was very much critical, and the traditional Indian economic system started losing its essence. It was a time when we have noticed the presence of forced labor, which is known as Visti. The forced labor means people or the peasants, I'm talking about the poor people, basically I'm talking about the mass or the majority who were the peasants, because the economy was agrarian economy. During that time, they were compelled to give labor without any reward. So it was something which can be termed as class exploitation to a great extent. Like how the people, if I would like to apply the Marxian theory here, that how the people who are having the resources, who are rich, we can term them as have, that how they were trying to exploit the have-nots. Ram Sharan Sharma, he mentioned that there were a number of taxes imposed on the peasants which were illegal, and this number was something huge. It was an excessive burden on the peasants. Sometimes in the inscriptions we get the reference of Adi or Adikam, that means etc. So it was not clearly mentioned that what kind of tax or what were the taxes used to be collected from the peasants. So there we find something dicey or not that much transparent. So it was a time, I definitely admit that the poor people, they were in a very much wretched condition. And that's why Marx, when he talked on Asiatic mode of production, he said that mode of production was not progressive. And definitely in early medieval period, when we find feudalism, when we find land grant system, that also caused some adverse effects in the society, leading to lack of social mobility and also some kind of a downfall in the field of trade and commerce. And how the economy, or how the agrarian economy, to be very specific, developed that time, it had no potentials rather than just to fulfill the aspirations of some people who were holding position in the society. So the accumulation of wealth was very much restricted during that time. Historian Ranabir Chakraborty has mentioned that during this particular period, we have seen the emergence of the self-sufficient villages and the class of intermediaries. Yes, intermediaries were definitely there, because when we talk on feudalism, there is also a probability of sub-infeudation. So, in that case, like that when the feudal lords, they were giving responsibilities to the people whom they trusted, that created the fragmentation of land, and also it caused more and more exploitations to the peasants. And who were these peasants? Apart from the rich peasants, we have the poor peasants, the tenants, the sharecroppers. And there were some people whom we cannot specify, because the data and the documents which we got with this regard are very scanty in nature. Still, early medieval period in Indian history is a mysterious period, and we need more researchers to explore the same. I must say, when I talk on the self-sufficient villages, how those villages emerged. Here I want to say like that the kings and the feudal lords, when they started exploiting the peasants, they unified by themselves, and they made their village as a self-sufficient unit through which they could be able to pay the land revenue. We find the villages of the Brahmanas and the non-Brahmanas. In those villages, the village head man, he played a very crucial role with regard of submitting or with regard of giving land revenue. It might be in the form of kind or in the form of cash. But definitely what we feel or what we have studied, mostly the land revenue was given in the form of kind, because the monetary system was not that much popular during that time, which later words, especially during the time of sultans, took a definite shape. But it was the origin of the village economy which we can identify during this particular period, and it is also giving us a clear picture about the relationships between the peasants and the landlords. So village played a very important role behind the dealings of the landlords and the peasants, where the representatives of the peasants, they had a crucial role, which I must say. So here we find like a kind of authoritarianism, or a kind of what I can say dictatorship arose from these problems of exploitations and getting exploited. As the people, the peasants, they were exploited by the rulers and the landlords. That's why the need for unifying themselves, for consolidating their status became very much necessary. And it was a time which was giving us a sense of future or further confrontations between the peasants and the landlords. So, during this particular time, we have seen in various parts of the Indian subcontinent, in Kashmir, in Bengal. If I talk on Bengal, I must mention the revolt by the Kaivartas, which were showing the sense of protest against the landlords, as they were exploiting the peasants to a great extent by exploiting or by extracting maximum number of taxes from them. So, in my lecture, this term exploitation is coming again and again. But unfortunately, the early medieval economic history is a gloomy phase of the Indian history, especially with regard to economy and the prosperity of the people. You have seen it was a time when the peasants, they started to be exploited in such a harsh manner, which later influenced Amir Khusro when he explained how Alauddin Khalji, he used to extract taxes from his peasants during the medieval period. He gave a very nice quotation or observation. What he wrote, that the king, that means Alauddin Khalji, is wearing a crown, and that crown is studded with pearls, and those pearls are the concentrated tears of the peasants. So perhaps that legacy started from the early medieval period. I would like to sum up my lecture by saying what were the important features of the early medieval Indian economy which would help my students to have a more better understanding of the relationships between the landlords and the peasants. I have talked on intermediary system, which was a part of Indian feudalism, closed village economy, that was also a part of the Indian feudal system. I talked on forced labor, and also during that time, exploitation of the peasants also being reflected through exploitation of surplus. And one more important features of Indian feudalism was that it was a time when the peasants, they started losing their rights over land. So I would like to end with this note that economic history is something which is not that much pleasant. It gives us a sense of understanding the plight of the people, especially who are marginalized or who are poor. It's a myth that whether we could be able to achieve scientific socialism or not, but there is no harm to accept the concept of class struggle and class exploitation, and if possible, to decipher the subaltern approach by exploring the history from below, or the history of exploitation of the people who belong to the society where we find they are always at the bottom line. Thank you.